On Sunday the 30th of January, around 2 years ago, a 29-year-old mother of two named Alexis Ware was supposed to be driving to her ex-mother-in-law's house when she would mysteriously disappear. Earlier that day, she had organised a meetup with her ex-boyfriend, TJ Patterson, at a local 7-Eleven gas station in Anderson, South Carolina, as he had agreed to take care of their kids for an unknown period of time. The drop-off appeared to be a success, with the two then being captured on surveillance cameras getting into their separate vehicles and driving off in the same direction. TJ would later explain that Alexis had agreed to follow him to his mother's house. However, once they stopped at a set of traffic lights, she suddenly decided to speed off in a different direction, causing TJ to become concerned. He then called her mother Alberta to tell her about the strange incident, and then 2 days later, Alexis was officially reported missing to the local police. But after 2 long years of investigation, the young woman still remains missing to this day, which has understandably left her family desperate for answers. However, in recent weeks, the case seems to have been given a new lease of life due to the recent disappearance of Marissa Carmichael, as the eerily similar details in their cases has led many to wonder, could these disappearances be connected? And if not, what really happened to these young mothers? Alexis Ware was born in 1992 to her loving mother Alberta Gray Simpkins in the town of Greenville, South Carolina, alongside her stepfather Frank and half-brother Travis. Not too much is known about her younger years, but as she moved into adolescence, her bubbly personality would begin to emerge, and soon enough, she had become the life of the party, with the ability to light up any room that she entered. Her friends would describe her as a compassionate and ambitious person who wasn't afraid to speak out for the people she loved and things she cared about, which were personality traits which perfectly complemented her go-getter attitude to life that would seem to foreshadow an incredibly successful future. In her teenage years, Alexis also discovered her passion for makeup and quickly decided that she wanted to be either a beautician or a hairstylist when she was older, with the goal of one day opening her own beauty salon or boutique. However, I think it would be safe to say that there was also another passion in Alexis's life, which undoubtedly took precedent over her aspiring career goals, as she would soon fall in love with her then boyfriend TJ Patterson, and after the pair began settling down, they eventually had 2 children together that they were equally determined to build a good life for. According to her family, Alexis was always an incredible mother and took to the role as naturally as you can imagine. However, despite her devotion to the kids, a lingering feeling still remained in the back of her mind about the career that she had once longed for. So, as her children grew older and started attending school, Alexis had finally found herself with some free time on her hands. And so, using her drive and ambition, she would then start to get her career back on track by getting her business license and stockpiling merchandise, which she planned to eventually sell in a boutique that she would soon be opening in Atlanta, Georgia, in order to be closer to her brother Travis. However, despite all of the great things that were happening in her life, at some point the relationship she shared with TJ unfortunately ended for reasons unknown. But despite their differences, the pair refused to let these issues come between the children, and therefore promised to remain amicable going forward. So I think it would be safe to say that during this time there were some huge changes going on in Alexis's life, including a promising social media career. But to add to the mayhem, it wasn't long before Alexis received an approval to break her lease so she could finally make the move to Atlanta and open her store. However, within just a few weeks of achieving all of her wildest dreams, Alexis would suddenly start to grow fearful that her life was in danger. It appeared that her online presence was attracting unsolicited messages from creepy men that would message her. These instances would be so scary that she became fearful of uploading any more photos, as every new upload would be greeted by the same creepy men that would continue to pester her. But this fear would soon evolve into pure dread when Alexis would receive a phone call from an unknown number that she would refer to as the devil. But to make matters even worse, after attempting to block the phone number, the same person would continue to call her anyway, as if the blocking had no effect. And this would lead to Alexis experiencing some extremely paranoid thoughts. At this time, she had also started becoming obsessed with zodiac signs, eventually claiming that she could sense danger in her future, and even more chillingly, she would warn her family of a dark premonition that a black truck was following her everywhere she went, and that she was being stalked by somebody. So, due to the dark nature of these claims, her mother Alberta was understandably concerned, but despite her attempts to keep her daughter safe, this horrifying prediction would appear to come true on that fateful day in January. On Saturday the 29th of January, Alexis was sitting in her mother's living room as the pair were speaking about her plans for the rest of the week. At the time, Alexis was staying with her mother Alberta in Greenville for the weekend, but was planning on leaving the following day, as on that upcoming Monday, Alexis had set up an appointment at the lottery headquarters in Augusta, Georgia, as she had purchased some lottery tickets and was preparing to turn them in for a big payout. So at first, everything seemed normal, and Alexis appeared to be somewhat excited for the week ahead. But suddenly, the conversation would take a dark turn, as Alexis began saying that she had a weird feeling that she wouldn't make it to her 30th birthday, which was just 2 months away at the time. Alberta thought this was very out of character, because Alexis was somebody who always went all out for her birthdays. Usually she would be making plans months in advance, deciding which outfit to wear and where to hold the celebration. But this year, she hadn't done anything at all, which of course played on Alberta's mind. So, rightfully concerned by her daughter's dark thoughts, Alberta then asked her why she was feeling this way, but despite her pleas for an answer, Alexis refused to explain any further, stating that she just had a feeling. At this point, Alberta then tried to plead with her daughter some more to stay with her until these worrying thoughts and creepy phone calls stopped. But against her mother's wishes, Alexis decided to leave anyway, determined to carry out her plans. So on that Sunday around midday, Alexis did her hair and makeup and got ready to leave, convincing her mother one last time that she was feeling better and that she would be fine. So without any real choice in the matter, Alberta said her goodbyes to her daughter as she walked out of the door and wished her a safe drive home. But it wouldn't be long before Alberta's worst fears would soon come true. On Sunday the 30th of January, Alexis arrived home safely not too long after leaving her mother's house and greeted her children before she began to unpack some of her belongings. She then sat down on the bed and decided to have a nap, as she knew she had a big week ahead. But just as she was drifting off into a deep sleep, her phone started ringing at around 3 p.m, as her mother Alberta was checking in to see if she had got home safe and was feeling any better. Alexis answered right away, and the conversation was certainly more positive than the previous day, but there were still some red flags appearing in the way Alexis was speaking. The same sense of fear was still present in her voice, and those strange dark thoughts of not making it to her 30th birthday were seemingly still there in the back of her mind, as the usually upbeat young woman was acting as if she was almost a shadow of her former self. But after an unknown amount of time, the phone call eventually ended, with the mother and daughter promising to speak again the following day as they normally did, and then Alexis attempted to go back to her nap. However, it wouldn't be too much longer before Alberta would receive another phone call, which would turn her mild concern into a living nightmare, as at approximately 7:30 p.m. later that day, her daughter's ex-boyfriend TJ would let her know that Alexis had been acting very strange. The conversation started with TJ asking Alberta if she had spoken to Alexis that day, and given that she had, Alberta then responded by confirming that they had seen each other that very morning, and also on FaceTime at around 3 p.m. He then went on to explain that during that afternoon, Alexis had actually contacted him to organise a meetup at a gas station in Anderson County, which was located around 40 minutes from her home, so she could hand their 2 kids off to him for a few days. The request was strange and very out of the blue, but given that Alexis was usually a very competent mother, he assumed that there was probably a good reason for this, and therefore agreed to meet her later that day to complete the exchange. So at approximately 7 p.m. that evening, Alexis arrived at the 7-Eleven gas station on Highway 29 in her red 2019 Honda Accord, and she was captured on surveillance footage speaking with TJ as the children climbed into their father's vehicle. TJ then helped Alexis pay for some gas as she was running low at the time, and then the two shared a short conversation before getting into their separate vehicles. TJ then explained to Alberta on the phone that during this gas station conversation, they had both agreed to drive over to TJ's mother's house, with Alexis claiming that she would be driving back over to her own mother's house afterwards. However, as both cars approached a set of traffic lights, Alexis suddenly shot around him with a high rate of speed and made a right-hand turn at the red light and took off from there. Well, in response, Alberta was more than shocked to hear this news, as Alexis had made no such plans with her, given that they had already spent the entire weekend together. So this was when her skepticism in the story started to arise, but it would seem that the concern she had for her daughter's safety would severely outweigh her suspicions, as rather than scolding TJ, she instead thanked him for the update and quickly hung up the phone, desperate to see if she could get in touch with Alexis. Alberta then tried calling Alexis herself, but the phone call went straight to voicemail, meaning that her phone was either turned off at the time or it was set to a mode where Alexis was unable to receive phone calls. So the concern that Alberta had for her daughter only increased with each failed attempt to get in touch. However, there was one more glimmer of hope, as Alberta knew Alexis was scheduled to visit the lottery headquarters in Augusta, Georgia on the following day. So she quietly held out hope that it would only be a matter of time before Alexis would turn her phone back on and get in touch with her family. But in yet another cruel twist of fate, Monday would soon come, and to everybody's shock, Alexis would fail to show up for her scheduled appointment. On Tuesday the 1st of February, Alberta would finally reach her wit's end as she was forced to accept the brutal reality of the situation and realised that she had no other option than to officially report Alexis as missing to the Anderson County Sheriff's Department. So, given the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance, the police quickly jumped into action, sending officers out to her last known location to see if they could gather any useful evidence. Sooner or later, they arrived on the scene and began interviewing the gas station attendants to find out who was working on that Sunday night, so they could ask them questions about what happened. They then also requested a copy of the surveillance footage from that night to see if there was any suspicious activity which would lead to any cause for concern. The next day, a police officer named Jeff Finley from Anderson County Sheriff's Criminal Investigation Team revealed that the camera was able to catch both TJ and Alexis at the gas station at around 7 PM, just as TJ had said, and to their surprise, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, a lot of the video was actually blocked by a tractor trailer that had come into view, but despite the obstruction, you could still clearly see that there didn't appear to be any struggle of any kind. The two had indeed shared a conversation, and TJ was also helpful in paying for her gas, as explained to Alberta. So the question then became, why did Alexis suddenly decide to speed off at the traffic lights? Well, in search for the answer, the police then tracked down the surveillance footage at the lights to see if this was true. But once again, they were able to confirm TJ's statements, as Alexis really had sped off just like he said. In fact, everything that TJ Patterson said was backed up by evidence, including his alibi for where he was after the gas station meetup. So very quickly it became clear that the father of Alexis's children was not responsible for her disappearance. So with this in mind, the police began searching security footage in the local areas to see if they could spot Alexis or her red Honda Accord, but at first, they wouldn't have much luck. According to Alexis's stepfather Frank, the police had made all types of efforts to find out where she may have gone to, but every lead seemed to come up empty. However, just a few days later, a tip would come in from a neighbouring police department that would seem to change everything. On Wednesday the 2nd of February, a red 2019 Honda Accord was found abandoned along a dirt road in a heavily wooded area in McCormick County, which was located about an hour's drive from the gas station. Apparently, the property owner had spotted it the day before, but as it was logging season at the time, he just assumed it had belonged to one of the workers. But after the vehicle didn't move once the workers had finished for the day, the property owner's suspicions increased, leading him to call the police to report it. He also mentioned that the way the vehicle was parked seemed like it was trying to be hidden, which worried him that it may have been related to some form of criminal activity. So that very same day, officers from both McCormick County and Anderson County were then sent out to the location to see if they could find any further evidence that may have led them to discovering Alexis, and immediately upon arrival, they noticed a black hair bonnet on the ground next to the vehicle. They then opened up the doors of the car and found Alexis's cell phone, her purse, a bag of clothes in the trunk, and also a set of lottery tickets that likely belonged to her. So as you can imagine, after uncovering these incredibly suspicious clues, it was then that the police began to seriously consider the possibility that foul play may have been involved. But refusing to miss any key details, the police then sent in the crime scene investigators to conduct another thorough examination of the vehicle to search for any potential fingerprints or stains that may have led to a suspect, and then soon enough, they successfully found some prints underneath a patch of mud, which they quickly sent back to the forensic lab for testing. So, as the investigators awaited the results of the lab tests, they decided to start a widespread search surrounding the area where the car was discovered, sending several officers out in the hopes that they would find Alexis before it was too late. However, this search would unfortunately not produce any further evidence, sending the team back to the drawing board to theorize what could have possibly happened to Alexis. But it wouldn't be too much longer before the next big tip would come in, adding yet another incredibly controversial piece to the puzzle. On Friday the 4th of February, another disturbing discovery was made when the Anderson County Sheriff's Department received a confirmed sighting of Alexis's red Honda Accord, with the very same license plate, parked outside of an apartment complex which was located not too far from the gas station. It then became apparent that during the same night she disappeared, Alexis had actually visited this apartment complex 2 times, and was supposedly captured on surveillance footage speaking to a woman who lived in the building. But to add to the controversy, later that night, a highway camera in Augusta, Georgia also picked up the same red Honda travelling down a freeway, implying that after leaving the apartment complex, Alexis had then driven the car down to Georgia. However, the police would later claim that the camera footage was unclear, therefore they could not determine if it was in fact Alexis who was driving the vehicle at the time, or somebody else. But either way, this was still a very mysterious detail to the police, as this meant that if it was Alexis driving the car, she would have had to have driven all the way down to Augusta, Georgia, and then back up to McCormick County, where she would then dump the vehicle. So this again screamed to the authorities that foul play had to be involved. The next day, Alexis's family headed down to the apartment complex in Anderson County, along with a large stack of flyers, and commenced their own search of that area, where they spoke to neighbours and shared images of Alexis. Given that her car was spotted in this location, Alberta Gray Simpkins was confident that somebody would know something about her daughter's whereabouts, and perhaps they would be more willing to speak to her over the detectives. So with hope in her heart, Alberta then knocked on every single door she could find and shared the missing person flyers around the local area to help spread the word of her missing daughter. However, despite her massive efforts, she was met with radio silence from the neighbours, with nobody being able to provide any useful information about Alexis. But determined to keep going, Alberta didn't let this setback stop her, and she continued to raise awareness by speaking to news reporters and sharing her daughter's story with as many people as she could on social media, hoping that somebody in the state would recognise Alexis and come forward with new evidence. However, as the days passed with still no sightings of the young woman, the little hope that Alberta had finally started to waver, as it seemed that every new lead would eventually go cold. And so, with nothing else to lose, she then turned her faith back to the Anderson County Sheriff's Department, as she prayed that they would eventually be able to deliver some good news. And then soon enough, her phone would ring. On Wednesday the 9th of February, the McCormick County Sheriff's Office posted a statement explaining that another search was conducted in the surrounding area of where Alexis's car was found. According to the authorities, they were joined by almost 10 other agencies to execute a grid search of 222 acres of land, utilising over 35 law enforcement personnel, K9 units, and even air support via helicopters and drones. However, despite their huge attempts to uncover new information, It appeared that there was no trace of Alexis, and so the officers were forced to make a difficult phone call to Alberta Gray Simpkins to deliver the bad news. A sheriff from Anderson County named Chad McBride would then explain to the public that although the search ended with negative results, we will continue to search until Alexis is found and reunited with her family. He then added, "The Anderson County Sheriff's Office has been working diligently to find information and evidence relating to the disappearance of Alexis Ware, and we are exhausting every possible avenue of inquiry on this case, and will continue to do so until it is solved. We are committed to finding Alexis and providing answers to her family." Sheriff McBride then detailed all the avenues that detectives had taken so far to help Alexis, writing that their office had obtained numerous search warrants and spent countless hours reviewing and analysing the results generated by those searches to make sure they didn't miss a specific detail. He also added that they reviewed surveillance footage from Alexis's last known locations and followed tips on possible sightings. And detectives interviewed family members and friends, including those who saw or spoke to Alexis prior to her disappearance. Detectives even checked multiple coroners and hospitals for unidentified patients, in addition to checking with TSA for flights that Alexis may have taken. But just as with every other lead, no further details would be revealed, alluding to Alexis's whereabouts. The fingerprints from the Honda Accord would also come back eventually. However, these tests would only reveal that the prints belonged to none other than Alexis herself, with no other evidence being uncovered in the vehicle to suspect another person being inside. So, after this announcement was released to the public, the family of Alexis were truly heartbroken and even more desperate for answers than they were before, as it was beginning to seem as if Alexis had simply vanished into thin air. But refusing to give up on their loved one, Alberta and the rest of the family continued to spread the story, praying that one day somebody would be able to provide just one piece of evidence that would hopefully change everything. Now, unfortunately, this is all we know about the case for now. But to this day, over 2 years on from the day of her disappearance, Alexis has still not been forgotten by her family, and they continue to share her story on social media every chance they get. In fact, I was personally only just made aware of this case recently by the Black and Missing Foundation, who alerted the public to her story on the 2nd anniversary of her disappearance. So it would seem that her case is still very much in the public eye, meaning it's only a matter of time before we find out the truth. However, with Alexis being missing now for over 2 years, I fear we have to accept the reality that with each month that has passed, the probability of her safe return has only grown more and more unlikely. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then I'm sure you'll know that I usually like to start this portion of the video by looking into some of the more optimistic explanations that are out there, as even in the darkest of situations, there is always the possibility of finding a light at the end of the tunnel. So without further ado, to kick off the theories, I would like to start by looking into the possibility that Alexis is still alive out there somewhere, but is simply being held captive by someone, just waiting to be rescued. Now, of course, I'm aware this is a far-fetched theory, but given the details Alexis revealed before her disappearance, it wouldn't be something I would rule out just yet. Firstly, Alexis was very vocal to her mother Alberta about all of the creepy men that were stalking her on her social media accounts. She even went as far as to say that she was scared to conduct photo shoots in case somebody would be there to cause her harm. Also, she was afraid to post pictures due to the disgusting messages she would receive from some of her followers. So I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that one of these men could have been responsible for her sudden vanishing. In addition, Alexis also stated to her family that a black truck had been following her and that she had been receiving strange calls from the same number, no matter how many times she blocked it. Now, I think you'll agree that these particular details are incredibly suspicious, seeing as she would disappear just a few days later. But before we continue looking into this theory, I believe there are 2 key questions that we still need to ask. If she was kidnapped by a stalker, how could she still be alive? Or, what if all of these details were simply made up by a woman who was struggling with her mental health? Well, to start with the first question, if a stalker had tracked her down and kidnapped her, he would have then needed to ditch the car in McCormick County, without anybody seeing him and without leaving any fingerprints at the scene. Now, although I'm sure this would be possible, I couldn't quite imagine a deranged lunatic having the mental capacity to conduct such a flawless crime as to remain undetected for over 2 years. But for argument's sake, let's say he did pull off this crime without leaving behind any obvious clues. He would have then needed to keep Alexis hidden all on his own for a significant period of time, without ever causing suspicion. I'm sure you can use your imagination to hypothesize where she could have been kept all this time, but my best guess would be some kind of basement or derelict house off-grid where no one would think to look. However, I feel it must be said that even in the best of circumstances, I think we can all agree that the likelihood of this being the case is close to impossible. But perhaps a more believable situation where Alexis could still remain alive would be if she was actually sold into the dark world of human trafficking. Now, just before I get into this one, please know that I am well aware of how many times this particular theory seems to come up in these videos, so if you are sick of me mentioning it by now, then I completely understand. But in the case of Alexis Ware, I feel like with her background in modelling and her claims to have been the victim of stalking, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that she may have been a prime candidate for human trafficking. She was also somebody who was living in an area that was known for high crime rates and prevalence of the dark practice, so with Alexis suddenly disappearing off the face of the earth in the way that she did, it could certainly be possible that she was actually sold off to the highest bidder. Now, this is of course a truly disturbing theory and one which we have to be very careful with due to the sensitivity of it, but the one positive I think we can take from this possibility is that if Alexis was forced into this life, that would mean that there is still a small chance that she could one day resurface and be reunited with her family. In fact, there have been multiple cases of women in recent years who have escaped alleged human trafficking rings in America, who are collectively helping to expose this disgusting practice by telling their stories. So I feel we have to hold out hope that if Alexis did somehow get involved in this, she still has the capacity to escape herself one day, when given the chance. However, before I get too carried away here, I feel it must be mentioned that there are still so many other possibilities in the case of Alexis Ware, some of which likely hold a lot more weight than the human trafficking angle. So rather than dwelling too much on it, I would like to take a moment to talk about a very similar case that occurred to another young black mother just a few weeks ago in the neighbouring state of North Carolina, as in my opinion, it appears to draw many parallels to the disappearance of Alexis Ware that are simply too coincidental to ignore. Now, as you may remember from the start of this video, I did briefly mention the case of Marissa Carmichael and how her recent disappearance has somewhat rekindled the public's attention for Alexis. But the reason I felt it was so important to mention is that alongside the fact that these two women shared the same complexion, were both in their 20s, and were both mothers of multiple children with ex-boyfriends that were still in the picture, there are also many more details which are arguably less superficial, such as the locations which they disappeared from, and the fact that witnesses claimed to have seen them at random apartment complexes after their vanishing. Now, if you're not familiar with Marissa's case, then I highly recommend checking out the video on screen now, as I go into a lot more detail and I'm sure you will be able to identify even more similarities in their cases that I haven't mentioned here. But just for the sake of context, I will quickly provide a brief rundown of her story. So, on Sunday the 14th of January, just last month, a 25-year-old woman named Marissa Carmichael would phone the police after having her belongings stolen by an unknown man and being left stranded at a gas station. She had been spending the night with her friends at a bar and was seen leaving with the same man earlier that night. However, after reporting the incident to the police, they then took 40 minutes to arrive on the scene, and by then, she was nowhere to be found. It was mentioned by an eyewitness that they saw Marissa getting into a car with a random customer sometime after the phone call, but after checking surveillance footage, the police were unable to trace the vehicle. Marissa was then reported missing by her family after she failed to return home the next day, and so the official search began, with the police starting at the club she had been attending that night. However, after 3 weeks of investigation, the young mother of 5 still remains missing to this day. Eventually, the man she was seen leaving the gas station with that night after phoning the police was identified. However, the story he gave was that he paid her for a service and then dropped her off at an apartment complex. But to the frustration of the authorities and Marissa's family, it seemed like everyone who was living in that complex was refusing to talk. So on top of the fact that both women's stories had ties to strange apartment buildings after going missing, both women were also making very questionable decisions leading up to their disappearance. Which leads me to ask the question: if they were kidnapped or abducted by somebody on those nights, is it possible that both Marissa and Alexis already knew their captors? Well, at this point it's impossible to say for certain, but to be honest, I am not a firm believer in coincidences, and with the similarities that exist between these cases, I feel it would be illogical to not draw some connections between them. However, saying this, it must also be stated that we still have no concrete proof that either woman was a victim of anything, and despite what you may assume, there are actually several other possible theories that we need to discuss. So refocusing our scope back to Alexis Ware, could it be possible that her disappearance was caused by none other than herself? Well, firstly, as you may have noticed, this was actually a question I asked earlier on in the video, but I had not quite got around to answering it yet due to the significance of the other theories. But I feel it must be said that I can't deny the fact that another plausible idea that deserves to be examined is the possibility that Alexis could have been struggling with a mental episode at the time of her disappearance, and during her suffering, her brain could have simply made up all of those sketchy details about the dark premonitions, and maybe even the stalkers that were harassing her. Now, this is a very difficult theory to contemplate, as there is no concrete proof that Alexis was telling the truth, but it would also seem that given her social media fame, having stalkers would have been a likely situation for a young woman such as herself. Also, everybody that spoke to her before the disappearance did say she was acting weird, but not to the point where she was mentally ill, more like she was hiding something. So to be honest, although I do feel it's somewhat worth mentioning, personally I would put this theory right at the bottom of the list in terms of plausibility, as based on the evidence, such as her car being found abandoned in a random location she had no ties to, and the fact that she left her kids with her ex-boyfriend, which to me shows she must have been in somewhat of her right mind at the time. It seems to me like mental instability would not have caused her to just vanish without a trace. However, if she wasn't mentally ill, could it be possible that she just left on her own accord? Well, to her parents Alberta and Frank, this explanation would also make no sense. In fact, they were quoted as saying, "You're talking about somebody that's on social media every day, all day." Plus, she had a large clientele spanning across multiple states to get their hair done. The family also went on to say, they thought it would be odd because between her busy work schedule and being a mum, Alexis would never just drop off the grid like that. Alberta even recalled Alexis being worried about the safety of her children. She actually said to me, "Mum, I don't know what I would do if something happened to me while my kids were in the car with me." So for Alexis to just leave her children behind without saying a word would surely not be something she would ever do. However, one avenue we are still yet to explore is what if by disappearing she was protecting her kids, as maybe she had actually got herself into some trouble with a bad group and therefore needed to separate herself from her family to keep them safe. Now, at this point in the video, I would like to touch on a very controversial theory which I'm sure many of you who are familiar with this case have been waiting for, which is to assess whether or not this mysterious lottery appointment Alexis had scheduled for the following day could potentially be the key to uncovering the truth here. According to a post I found on Reddit, as well as a seemingly legitimate source on YouTube, it would appear that during the days leading up to her disappearance, Alexis may have borrowed or stolen some money from a group of big-time players in the local area, and so allegedly, they may have wanted some payback. She was apparently only saying that she had won the lottery to appease the people she owed money to, which was around $40,000 according to this source. The group then allegedly kidnapped her, and as she continued to fail to come up with any money, Alexis was unfortunately killed, and her body was disposed of in a way nobody would be able to find it. Now, given the incredibly controversial nature of these claims, once again we have to be extremely vigilant in what we choose to believe here. After all, this could just be a story made up to cause drama, or maybe even a rumour that was purposely spread by the actual culprits as a means of getting the police off their backs. But either way, we cannot say for certain, and I for one am not comfortable discussing this theory in any more real depth, as I simply cannot validate its authenticity. But before I write it off completely, I will say that there was also some camera footage that was leaked to the public, which displayed a woman that appears to be Alexis on the night of her disappearance, at that mysterious apartment complex her car was spotted at. The footage appeared to show a dishevelled looking woman wearing a bonnet, just like the one Alexis was seen wearing at the gas station, and the one found by her car in McCormick County. However, despite the concerning details that can be seen in the recording, just like the Reddit post, its validity has also been brought into question. But I must say, this was despite the very similar appearance of the woman in the video, the fact that the timestamp on the footage appeared to match up perfectly with the time she left the gas station. Plus, many people have actually come forward to claim that this was indeed Alexis in that video. But nevertheless, the audio is just too difficult for me to comprehend, so I can't quite bring myself to say without certainty that it is actually her. However, if you would like to watch the full unedited surveillance footage, make sure to check out Rachet TV's video after this and let me know what you think. I will leave a link in the description below. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own that you think may help explain what really happened to Alexis Ware, please leave your comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I featured in this video, such as Marissa Carmichael, feel free to check out the videos on screen now.